Hi. Okay. Hi, my name is Andrew Robinson, and if you are new to this channel or you are one of my subscribers, you deserve to know who you're watching. The events that are unfolding before our eyes on television are heartbreaking, and there's no excuse for it. The death of George Floyd is a tragedy, but what is unfolding, the protests, the peaceful protests, the unrest, is not because of George Floyd. It is because he is but another example of the problem that we face in this country. So I don't have the world's biggest platform, and I am not going to speak to the plight of Black America, but I am going to do what I can with what I have to the best of my ability to contribute to the solution and not be a part of the problem. So a portion of the proceeds from this channel for this month are going to be going to the charities that we are linking below. I know it may not be much, but it is what we can do. And I would encourage all of you watching this to do the same. And I'm also going to encourage you, because maybe you don't always do this, please, please, please sit through every single ad that will run during this video. If you do, you will maximize our potential to help. So thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Several months ago, Christy and I purchased our first new to us vintage component in the form of a Pioneer SX450 from a local record shop here in Austin, Breakaway Records. And that set off kind of a chain reaction of events because we were shocked. We were shocked at how good the Pioneer sounded. And when given a few little modern updates, it actually rivaled some of the modern components that we have in-house here for review. And so to say that not overnight, but relatively quickly, I became a fan of vintage audio gear would be an understatement. And Christy can attest to this because I do. I spend some time at night, usually before bedtime, kind of just scrolling through eBay and just Googling all of the really, really cool things that used to exist back in the day that have stood the test of time and are available to us now at vastly, vastly discounted prices. Although there are some pieces that, holy crap, they are still very expensive, arguably more expensive now than they were when they were new. Anyway, it wasn't eBay that led me to today's product. It was Instagram. I know we've been saying a lot about how we're getting inspiration from Instagram, but it's true. It's true. There's actually a pretty big audiophile community on Instagram. And I have been particularly drawn to some of the more European-based profiles, which is how I came to find out about the Kenwood KA-2500 that we are talking about here. And I just saw this piece and I did not recognize it. And frankly, it didn't look like anything that I had seen before. And the original poster of the photograph of the Kenwood KA-2500 didn't really give a lot of detail. He or she just stated what it was. And so curiosity got the best of me, and I went to the best place that I know where to research vintage gear, which is eBay. And I just typed in Kenwood KA-2500, and lo and behold, there was one. There was one. And it had no bids. It was going to expire in a week or 10 days. And so late night, just before bed, I just placed my bid thinking, there's no way this is going to happen. You know how it goes. And 10 days later, I got an email from eBay letting me know that I was now going to be receiving my new to me Kenwood KA-2500. Well, it took about a week to get here, and in that week, I did what I maybe should have done before placing a bid, which is try and learn as much about this product that I had just purchased for $133 before it got here. And so turns out trying to find information about old Kenwood products, specifically old Kenwood amplifiers from the early 60s, is actually kind of difficult. There are a number of websites that do cater to the vintage market, but every time that I would type in some variation of the Kenwood model number, it really didn't return a whole lot of results. So those of you that are fans of Pioneer, Marantz, Technics, Sony, things like that, there's a wealth of information out there. But for whatever reason, when it comes to Kenwood or early 1960s Kenwood products, it's slim pickings. But some of the things that I did find out about the KA-2500 were rather interesting. First, it may be among the first solid-state designs ever produced. Now, I have read a few articles that say it is actually the first, whereas some debate that and say it's among the first. So I'm going to say it's one of the first solid-state designs. And if you don't know what that means, it means that prior to this time period, everything that we were doing in consumer electronics was tube-based. And in the early 60s, maybe through the Kenwood KA-2500, we transitioned from tubes to solid-state. And the Kenwood KA-2500 is a Class AB design, and I have to say, for a first gen, if you will, solid-state design, this thing packs a lot of power. And that kind of surprised me because we have a Pioneer receiver, which you've all seen, which is from the late 70s, and it has a measly 15 watts of total power. And it's 15 watts of glorious power, but it's 15 watts. And so in 1962, 63, 64, to learn that the Kenwood 2500 has upwards of 70 watts was rather shocking. Because you kind of imagine things to start rather low or slow and then build up, where it would seem that early designs packed a lot of power, then we tapered off, and then back into the late 70s and early 80s, we went into an arms race of watts. So yeah, I was surprised that the Kenwood KA-2500 was as powerful as it appeared to be on paper. I also learned that it was sold under a variety of names because Kenwood at this time was, I don't know if importer is the right word, but they did. They sort of imported things, put their name on it, or resold things under different names. And some of the names that this particular design was resold under was Trio, and Trio was closely associated with Kenwood at this time. In fact, they were the Kenwood Trio company. So depending on where you lived in the United States or maybe in the world, this amplifier, the KA-2500, may carry a Trio badge. But another brand that also took this design, repackaged it, and sold it as their own was Lafayette. And near as I can tell, between these three brands, Kenwood, Trio, and Lafayette, they are all the same piece, meaning they have all of the same basic specifications that I was able to find. Now, I am going to share those specifications with you, but as you know, we don't go really deep into specifications. But in this instance, we're not going to go really deep into specifications because honestly, they're incredibly, incredibly hard to come by. And I feel like I have found 3 or 4 completely different sets of specs for this one integrated amplifier. So these are the most common uniform specs that I was able to find across all 3 models or all 3 brands, so that I think these are the most accurate specs for the Kenwood KA-2500. Like I said, I discovered this on Instagram, and the original photo of it on Instagram gave no indication as to its size. None whatsoever. So when it showed up in a relatively small box, I was like, that's interesting, because like many of you may be watching this, even judging by the B-roll you've seen so far, you may think that this is a 17, 18, 19-inch wide component. It is not. This thing is tiny. It has more in common with, say, a Name Unity Atom or a Denon 150H, which we have reviewed on this channel, than it does the Pioneer receiver that came a decade or so later, or any modern component that you're used to seeing in 2020. And I was floored by that. I really was. I was not expecting a compact, tiny little piece. I would have told you that it was forward thinking at that time to maybe make a small piece, or that people in 2020 or manufacturers in 2020 are forward thinking for making small pieces. But Kenwood did it in the 60s. And they did it the first time out of the gate. So what changed? Why'd we go to these massive monolithic boxes? And these are all the questions that came to my mind when I was just holding this tiny little integrated amp. And then to look at it and realize that it's small and it packs almost 70 watts of power, and it has all of the requisite controls that you would want. It has 2 phono stages, an auxiliary input, a tuner input. Like, they did it. The things that I'm clamoring for in 2020 design-wise, they did it in 1962. And that's awesome. That's awesome. That's just kind of like my little side remarks, because it's just a beautiful piece. Everything down to the typography that Kenwood chose to use on this particular amplifier, it just screams modernism and just class, just absolute class. And I absolutely love it, and loved it, and was surprised when I took it out of the box. But you didn't come here. You didn't come here for my opinions on its style. You're curious yourself. Well, what does it sound like? So what does it sound like? As I said in our Pioneer review, I am not one of these people that is going to tell you that vintage electronics are better than modern ones in terms of overall sound quality. Same as I won't say that vinyl records are superior to digital. They're just different. They're just different. But they can still be good. They can still be the sound that you are after. And the Kenwood KA-2500 is surprisingly good, especially when you consider that this is but a first foray into solid-state amplification. And I half expected, upon learning that the KA-2500 was a first-generation solid-state design, I half expected it to kind of sound like crap, to be honest with you, because what did anyone know about this particular type of topology? And yet, I was shocked. I was shocked. Now, I'm not going to be one of these people that says vintage is better, because it's not. Vintage components can and do sound remarkable. They do. Are they better than the technology that you can get today in every sense of the word? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's okay, because different strokes for different folks, and it's still possible. It's still possible to like the sound of a vintage piece, and it's still possible to want the sound of a vintage piece, even though you know it's not perfect. And the KA-2500 isn't. It's not. It's not perfect. In fact, it has a lot of flaws. But it sounds remarkably good. And the power output and the power delivery is such that it is shockingly controlled for what it is in a first-generation Class AB design. And it is able to power some rather difficult to drive loudspeakers with the sort of authority that you would otherwise associate with more modern amplifiers. But let's break it down. You know how we do it here. We break it down. Starting with the bass. The KA-2500's bass is good. It's solid. It's not the most tactile or defined, if you will. It does definitely plunge into the basements. It definitely has that bit of grunt, and it definitely can slam. But the little textural nuances escape it. They do. But it gets the broad strokes right. And it does so with surprising authority. And if you have a loudspeaker that is a little bit more efficient or that may have a little bit of sweetness in its bass. Say, for instance, the Yamaha C97 Mark IIs that kind of have that little extra bass slap by design, then the pairing is very, very nice indeed. But if you have something that may already be a little bit rolled off in the bass or a little tubby or slow, it's only going to accentuate that because you're kind of getting two scoops of the same thing on top of each other. Mid-range, however, with the 2500 is, well, it's vintage through and through. And I think this is one of the things that a lot of enthusiasts gravitate towards, is that kind of vintage mid-range. It is. It's very pleasing. I'm not going to lie. It's very pleasing. Is it neutral? Hell no, it is not. But it is so enjoyable, and it makes listening to music kind of just comforting. You know, sometimes, you know, certain music elicits a certain mood, but there was always this kind of prevailing feeling of just, when listening to music through the 2500. And that comes down to the mid-range. It's not syrupy, it's not thick or anything like that. It just kind of has a little bit of like a sheen, like a little like Vaseline on the edges of the lens, if you will. Everyone just looks a little nicer through it. And so if you have bad recordings, and you know, we listen to a lot of different types of recordings, some of which are very high quality through our Tidal streaming, and some which are not that great. But it kind of treats everything rather equally, and that's its strength. In terms of high frequencies, this is the Achilles heel of this particular design, because while it does have a good fair amount of air and extension up top, the treble is a little bit, a lot of it on the grainier side, especially at higher volumes. And at higher volumes, if the recording isn't pristine, glare is present. And the other thing that you're going to reveal through the high frequencies, specifically through your tweeter of any speaker, really, because of this amplifier, is the fact that its signal to noise ratio and its noise floor in general it's just high. It's just high. So when we paired this with our Klipsch Heresy Mark IVs, yes, the pairing was, it was a match made in heaven, and it sounded brilliant. But in between songs, that tweeter, I mean, it's audible. It's audible. And so if you have really high efficiency loudspeakers, I'm talking 95, 96, 97 dB efficient or better, it's just something you're going to have to live with. But this is true of a lot of vintage components, including our Pioneer receiver, which is quieter than the Kenwood KA-2500, but still it has that noise floor. But once you get past that, or once you learn to once your brain sort of gets used to it and kind of learns to tune it out, the high frequencies are surprisingly satisfying here. But again, at high volumes with the wrong speakers, they can exhibit some grain and they can exhibit a little bit of glare. On a whole, the sound is actually really, really pleasing. It is, and played within the limits of volume. This is not an amplifier, even though it may have the power to do it. This is not an amplifier that I would ever recommend listening at levels in excess of, say, 90, 95 dB, because it does thin out considerably in terms of its sound quality. But for everyday normal listening, something that you're just looking to kind of just smooth and be chill about, it's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. And another surprising trait about its performance was the soundstage. The soundstage on the 2500, or the soundstage the 2500 is capable of reproducing, provided the recording has it to give, is amazing. It's really impressive, surprisingly so. It does favor lateral width, that you're going to get a greater sense of width than you are depth, but the placement of instruments within any given soundstage, no matter what kind of genre of music you may be listening to, is phenomenal. And the center imaging is, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. It's superb, which is kudos, because like I said, this is a first generation solid state design. So that is surprising that so many little kind of hi-fi things that we attribute a lot of value to in the modern era are present here. They are. You can do better, but they're still present, which is just awesome. Dynamically, the 2500 can slap. It really can. It can throw down if you want it to. Like, and I know I just said this is not an amplifier that I would throttle the volume on, and I stand by that. But within its wheelhouse, it has the power and enough control that it can pull out all of the little nuances and macro dynamics and things like that that make it very, very engaging, even at lower volume. So on a whole, it's wholly satisfying. Maybe not the best, but it is still very satisfying. So what don't I like about it? Well, it is an older piece. It's an older piece, and there are some things about it, and I want to throw in this caveat. What I'm going to say is obviously everything that we say on this channel, everything that we say on any review is subjective. These are my subjective opinions about something. But also when dealing with used pieces, I don't know if what I'm going to describe is true of all examples or if it's just mine. I should have pointed out in the beginning of this review that my KA-2500 was advertised to me via eBay as being restored, fully cleaned out and restored, new lights and all that put in. And so I'm hoping, or I'm assuming, that I have a very, very good example. So my downsides, my things to look out for are true of the breed, but I just want to throw that little caveat out there. For starters, these use screw binding posts or screw head type binding posts, and those were very standard in this era, especially during the tube era into the 60s. We didn't get to push pin style binding posts until a little bit later. So if you want to change out speaker cable, you're looking to use bare wire kind of only, and you need a screwdriver in order to connect and disconnect your speaker cables. Now, knowing that I now own this piece and it's going to be with me for the long term, I will likely replace the binding posts with modern 5-way binding posts. And that's not difficult to do. But since my piece is all original or all original restored, it still has those screw pots, and you take for granted how awesome having 5-way binding posts in 2020 is. It's a total luxury, and I never in a million years would have looked at binding posts as being a luxury, but they are. Because doing this to just change out the speaker cables is, it's such a pain in the butt. Other things to consider, it does have 2 phono inputs, which is awesome. They are a little bit on the noisier side, but all of the inputs, like I said, on this particular amp are noisy. So if you already kind of maybe have a turntable that is vintage and all original that may have its own noise issues, it's going to be somewhat amplified, magnified here. Now, when we used our U-turn orbits, thankfully, those are very well constructed, new, grounded, the works, and it did tamp that down. But I did notice a bit of a noise floor or noise shift from the phono inputs to even the auxiliary input being just a little bit quieter. I don't know, this is something else. The front power light on the KA-2500 is brighter than the sun. And I know my bulbs are new. I know they've been replaced, but they have not been replaced with LEDs. They have been replaced with new old stock bulbs of that era. So there's no kind of blue or green modern LED glow coming out of the power indicator light. That is to say, though, it is bright, especially if you like listening in a dim environment. I mean, the light is brighter than that lamp behind me, to be perfectly frank. And so long term, I may kind of tamp that down. I don't know how just yet, but I might want to dim that back because it's noticeable. Even in a cabinet, it comes through like, an Iron Man laser. Outside of that, there's no weird smell with this particular piece, which leads me to believe that, yes, it has been cleaned out. And my Pioneer, if I were to lift the top, is probably incredibly dirty. So no grandma's attic smell here. It doesn't run as hot as the Pioneer. It still runs warm, but not nearly as hot. It is prone to a little bit of ground loop hum. So if you have ground loop hum issues in your home or your electrical, You're going to want to make sure those are sorted, or you're going to want to figure out how to properly ground this particular piece to the rest of your system. The plug is attached from the factory, so it's not something that you can easily swap out. But if you're an electrician or you have some electrical skills, you can go ahead and treat that how you want. It's kind of a cool little piece of kit, I'm not going to lie. And what does it compare to? I have no idea. I have no idea, because I am just getting my feet wet in vintage audio. So I don't want to lie to you and say, oh, it's just like this, or, oh, you should check it out like this. I did compare it to our Pioneer. The Pioneer is better overall. The Pioneer, just, you can tell that there has been some time and some development in the technology. The Pioneer is a little cleaner in the high frequencies. It's a little bit more neutral, a little bit more extended throughout. It has a little bit better bass control, which is shocking because it's only 15 watts and the Kenwood 2500 is 50-60. But the Pioneer is superior. But I also now think that our Pioneer is due for some restoration, because our Pioneer, in its functionality in touching of the controls and things like that, is considerably noisier in comparison to our 2500. So I do think that our 2500 is a better restoration than our Pioneer, but sonically, apples to apples through the same speakers, I do think the Pioneer is just a little bit better. And if I'm honest, as jazzed as I am about the styling of the 2500, and I'm pretty jazzed, I do like the glow of the Pioneer on that tuner. I'm not the biggest tuner fan. I would love the Pioneer to be actual power meters, but I do like that orange glow, and that is something that is missing from the Kenwood integrated amp. But outside of that, I don't really know what else to compare it to from its era. Like I said earlier in this review, the Kenwood KA-2500 reminds me a lot of some modern components, chiefly the Name Unity Atom, which we have in-house, and then, of course, the Denon 150H that we have reviewed. But other than that, I'm for $133 delivered in the condition that it's in and the performance that it has provided us and the joy that it has brought to me, and just looking at kind of where we actually maybe started, it raises a lot more questions. And why did we drift away from this really compact style and beautiful design to these large Herculean things? Like, what caused that? And so these are some of the questions that I want to answer for myself. And so as we occasionally pepper in some vintage stuff to this channel, you may see me progressing through the decades trying to figure out for myself. So anyway, that is today's review, guys. Thank you so very much for watching. I know there is a lot going on, and we talk about, well, let's face it, we talk about toys. And I'm not making this video to distract, because that's not what we need. That's not what we need. We don't need a distraction. But like I said in the opening of this video, we will be donating a portion of the proceeds to the various charities down in the description below. And if you want to do something today, right now, all of them are linked, and they're the only things that are linked down below. Pick one, read up on it, decide if it's right for you, and please do whatever you can to help, because it matters. It matters. So that's it, guys. That is today's review. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. I want everyone to be well. I want everyone to be safe. And I want everyone to take care of yourselves and take care of the person next to you, no matter who they are. So that's it for me. Thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And we'll see you on the next video. Bye.